Good morning and welcome to the a proud Malcontent on this Sunday, the 31st of August. I'm Pete Bell and I am proud to be a Malcontent. What's on today? Well, I have a couple of things to look at. A little later, we'll be welcoming back Stephen Duncan for the final part of his study of the referendum franchise, both the 2014 referendum franchise and what implications that might have for the future. This is all part of Confute Corner, of course, where we try and dispel some of the myths, fallacies and fantasies that surround the constitutional issue. Speaking of which, I have one of those to deal with first thing in this show, and it's this. It's a petition which I've just lately become aware of, and the petition goes, legislate a democratic exit clause for all nations of the United Kingdom. It's a petition to the UK Parliament, part of the Westminster petitions process. And it reads, legislate to create a democratic, peaceful withdrawal process for any UK nation from the Union. We believe that without a more clearly codified exit route, the Union could risk becoming involuntary. We think this could undermine this democracy and breach the UK's international obligations. Well, right. That's all very well, but it can't happen. It's not possible because basically what the petitioner here is talking about is transferred powers. And Westminster cannot devolve powers which supersede its own. That is basically the point. It cannot transfer or devolve powers that would give the people, voters in a referendum, the final word on any issue. Because the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty means that that Westminster must have the final word on everything, absolutely everything. So this petition is no different from there was Neil Hanvey had a 10-minute rule bill seeking to permanently transfer powers, permanently devolve. There's no such thing as a permanently devolved power. It just doesn't exist. A contradiction in terms. Ash Reagan, there's been rumours of a bill. I've yet to see the actual bill or the draft bill. Ash Reagan also suggesting transferred powers. And that is what Section 30 referendum is transferred powers, temporarily transferred powers, but they're limited powers. Westminster always has the last say. So I'm afraid this petition is kind of a waste of time. Not only is the petition going to be turned down because constitutionally Westminster cannot do this, it wouldn't happen anyway. It can't happen. That's it. Then A, the political will isn't there, and B, constitutionally, Westminster is incapable of doing this because it contravenes the doctrine of parliamentary sovereignty. So there's that, and that's that issue we have is I get to say something very positive for a change. Andrew Tickell, who normally writes about legal matters, legal aspects of, excuse me, various issues. Today, however, in the Sunday National, Andrew, in his column, deals with what he calls the feral media. And it's a superb column. It's absolutely scathing about the UK mainstream media. And I was looking through it, as I usually do, trying to highlight pieces to read out, so as to demonstrate what it is that he's talking about. But I would have ended up highlighting the whole thing, because it is so good and it is all of a piece. So it would be very difficult to pick any bit out of it. But he talks about the media and how there's nothing new. Like, we're seeing all the outrage about immigration at the moment, and immigrants with demonstrations, etc., etc., all very distasteful. And this is portrayed as something that has suddenly arisen. Not so. Andrew Tickell points out in his column that it's the news. It lays down, it forms like a sediment, because it lays down these stories time after time after time over a long period, and they gradually build up. You get this sedimentary effect, and that is what leads to the situation that we have at the moment, with demonstrations outside hotels and all this immigrants go home, stop the boats nonsense. Andrew talks about how it goes back. It goes back even further, but he talks about how it goes back to Brexit. He says the dynamic isn't new. Take Brexit. For decades, Britain's press had been telling its readers day and daily that tin pot bureaucratic commissars in Brussels were hatching plots to undermine the UK's political sovereignty and impose fresh pettifogging regulations on the plain people of the United Kingdom in defiance of common sense and probably Magna Carta. That kind of propaganda, and that's what it is, it's propaganda. That kind of propaganda sort of probably sounds familiar. It certainly does to me. Andrew goes on, the backbench bastards of John, that's his word, not mine. Backbench bastards, I believe it was John Major's word initially. The backbench bastards of John Major's government, who kept banging on about the evils of the European Union over decades, might not have experienced immediate success or even obvious progress during the 1990s. But Tony Blair's tenure in Number 10 did nothing to discourage them from peddling intoxicating stories about the bendy banana bans and the sweeping prohibition Brussels had in contemplation for the humble prawn cocktail crisp. That's Andrew given a couple of examples of the kind of stories that appeared in the UK media all the time. And they appeared as a kind of light-hearted way, although, you know, the fuming of the likes of the Daily Express and the Daily Mail is always slightly amusing anyway. But these stories were presented in this sort of semi-humorous way, light-hearted way. But it was over and over again. Every day there was something. It might have just been a little thing, but every day there was something. The regulations about bendy bananas, how curved bananas could be, and that sort of thing. And the one about banning prawn cocktail crisps, and they were all lies. They were all lies. They were all based, like most of the good lies, they were all based on, there was a little grain of truth in there somewhere, but then that grain of truth was burdened with all manner of fantasy. The bendy bananas thing was regulations, and the point is, it was the industry itself that asked for these regulations. And it was something to do with packaging, how they were packaged, and there were other things as well. I remember there were other things that were outright lies. I remember somebody I had an exchange with many years ago. He had tried to become a Tory councillor. The Tories wanted nothing to do with him. He tried to become a Brexit party councillor, and even the Brexit party that wanted nothing to do with him. But he kept telling the story about how a friend of his had a care home and how he was going to have to close it because he couldn't afford the changes, the structural changes that were required by those commissars in Brussels. And I looked at that and I thought, that doesn't sound right. And I examined it, and of course, I found out it was nothing to do. There was no EU regulation about care homes at all. It was all done in England and Wales. It was regulations for England and Wales. And so not only was there no EU regulation, but the regulations were actually created in England in consultation with the care home industry, and they were about safety. They were about things like the width of fire doors, so that hospital beds, wheelchairs could get through in case of an emergency. So that was a total lie. But all these stories, and this is the point Andrew's making, all these little stories, seemingly trivial in themselves, were piled up day after day after day. And what we then saw with Brexit was a direct result. Brexit happened. People in England and Wales narrowly, they voted for Brexit. They voted leave on the basis of decades of lies being told day after day. And then we come to the immigration issue as it is now. Well, it's always been an issue of sorts, but it's a sort of peak at the moment. And it's all connected because then we had Brexit, which happened because the media, the feral media, as Andrew puts it, had told lies over decades. And pre-Brexit, there was a perfectly good arrangement for dealing with illegal immigrants, the Dublin Agreement. It was an agreement by which immigrants, illegal immigrants, people who landed in the UK illegally, could be sent back to not to their original country, but to whichever European country they'd arrived in first or sought asylum in first. And that could be done without reference to the court. It was a simple process, and it was an automatic process. And there were thousands of illegal immigrants were sent back in that way. And there was no small boat problem because the people could simply be sent back. Brexit, built on lies, remember, Brexit, built on lies, did away with the Dublin Agreement. So it did away with that simple, effective way of dealing with illegal immigrants. So Brexit actually created the boat people problem, the small boats problem, if you see it as a problem. I only see it as a problem for the people in the boats. And so we get these immigrants, and now we get another example that connects yet again to all the lies that are told about immigrants, how people can't get jobs because immigrants are taking them all, immigrants and asylum seekers. The stories kind of lump them all together, although they're quite different. And how these immigrants are taking thousands and thousands of pounds in benefits in the big families, and they're living in 4-star hotels and whatnot. And it's all lies, but they're lies which get people out on the streets and trying to burn down actually 1- or 2-star hotels where these immigrants are put up. And remember, those immigrants are only there, they're illegal immigrants or asylum seekers. The illegal immigrants, remember, they're only there because of Brexit, which was built on lies. And now we get the lies told about those immigrants, which is getting people out on the streets. And it all comes back to the media. It's all driven by the feral media. I could go on about that for the rest of the day, but we have a show to do, and it's already 1:15. And I said I would make sure that we left plenty of time for what Stephen's talking about today, because the title of his Confute Corner piece today is Won't Get Fooled Again, and we'll get Stephen on himself to explain what it's about. Hello, Stephen.
Hi, Peter.
Welcome to the show. Stephen's got a new computer and he's got the volume turned up rather loud, so yeah, we'll definitely be able to hear him. But okay. He's got a new computer, so you perhaps might notice you can actually see his face now. It's not just this pixelated blur. But I can assure you, if you don't recognise him, that is Stephen. I've checked it out. So. Stephen, you could have control of the slideshow, so I'm going to hand it over to you just to explain to people exactly what it is that you're going to be talking about today.
Okay, I've adjusted the sound, so hopefully I'm not blaring out as I was a couple of minutes ago. Okay, so yeah, as you mentioned, Peter, it's the third part of the sort of study of looking at the franchise that was used in 2014 and how and what might be used in any future referendum. So I'm sort of theming it as "Won't Get Fooled Again" because it's the reference to the fact that all we need to do is to win the next referendum is to sort of disqualify people who weren't born in Scotland from the referendum, and independence will be ours. So just a quick recap on the first two parts of this. In the first part, that the Scottish referendum that was carried out post the referendum, 6 months after the referendum, that its findings were questionable. If you remember, the findings were that a majority of Scottish voted yes in the referendum. You know, scrutinising them, looking at the next thing, or last week, what we looked at was the opinion polls near the or on the eve of the referendum, which indicated that Scottish-born. There was a majority of Scottish-born, but 53% people voted for independence. But that opinion poll was overstated at the overall level, and when you applied that error factor to the different population segments, again, we found that Scottish-born voted no. It was marginal, but 49%, but nonetheless, it confirmed the suspicion from the first part of this that people in Scotland, or people born in Scotland, were against independence, as was everybody else, even if it was just marginal. So that brings us on to today's episode, which was concerned with what would the impact be of restricting the franchise. And people may know already that there's been some recent plebiscites in New Caledonia, which is a French colony in the Pacific. There was three referendums, one in 2018, one in 2020, one in 2021, where they applied some restrictions, had some qualifying criteria. And so people are reasonably stating, well, what's good enough for New Caledonia is good enough for all Caledonia. So looking at that, the sources that I've got on that state that there was about 17% of people in New Caledonia were knocked out when they applied the criteria, of which there were about 6 to 8 criteria. I think it was 6 in the first referendum and 2 criteria in the last 2 referendums. We'll come back to that a bit later on. Okay, so looking at what's happened since the referendum in terms of yes sentiment in Scotland, things have changed quite significantly. So this graph looks at uses the panel-based opinion poll. Panel-based, if you remember, are the one pollster that breaks down its opinion polls by country of birth. So these this chart here looks at the yes percentages, an average of yes percentages across the time period since the referendum. This is subsequent to the referendum, and each point on these lines is an average of 5 adjacent opinion polls. So the reason for taking an average is so that any sort of spikes and blips in any one particular opinion poll is smoothed out, and what you're getting is really more of an underlying sort of level of yes support. So the first thing that stands out to me anyway is the purple line. So the purple line looks at the what the yes support was for those people born outside Scotland and born outside England, and you see that it's around about 1/3 immediately post referendum. 1/3 people are in favour of yes, so 2 to 1 against. But notice that it's almost a vertical incline, immediately after that. So I put that around the 2016-2017 period, and I put that down to to Brexit. The people have responded. People from elsewhere have responded to the Brexit vote by moving in favour of yes if there were to be another referendum. And you can see that peaks around about March, April 2017, about 54% favour. So quite a significant jump, a real step increase there, 33% to 54%. Thereafter, there's a little bit of a dip following that. I don't know why that would be, but I imagine it could be that people thought, well, really, they're not going to be that daft. Brexit is not going to happen. Maybe we'll. Maybe that vote will be overturned. If you remember all the chaos in Westminster Parliament at the time, perhaps it was some kind of response to that. But then as Brexit happened, or it dawned on people it was going to happen, and did happen, that climbed up again. And you see for the last few years, probably from about 21 onwards, that purple line is the highest of them all, continuously over 50% of people in favour. Fairly stable, therefore. Looking at the red line, that's those people born in England. It's a much lower level. Only about 1 in 4 people were in favour of independence immediately after the referendum. Then, as Brexit dawned on people that Brexit was going to happen, that climbed to about 35% at a peak about 4 years ago, and has remained roughly there ever since, about 33% this year currently. So it's gone from 1 in 4 people in favour to only 1 in 3. Still a drag on independence, but quite a significant change all the same. Right, now this next slide has a look at, well, there's a sort of what-if scenario, if you like. If we applied a restriction to the franchise and made an assumption that, as what happened in the New Caledonia referendum, 17% of people who are not born in Scotland were excluded from voting. So the 2 tables here, I'll just go through them slowly. The top table is a summary of the 5 opinion polls, yes and no support, by country of birth, immediately after the referendum. So just to give you an example, the Scottish vote is the Scottish number of respondents in favour of yes was 1,962, 51.6%. No's 1841, 48.4%. And so on and so forth. So you can see on that raw, the first two columns on that raw opinion polling, there was a 3.9% in favor of no. When I made the adjustment, and the adjustment I was making was to downweight those people born in England and elsewhere by 17%. So what I did was take a look at the total number of respondents from these two countries, multiply them by 0.83, so that's a 17% reduction, keep the yes-no splits as they were, and then see what the overall impact is. So that 3.9% advantage to no falls to 2.9%, so the swing of 0.5% from no to yes, but no still leads, had no difference, had no impact. The second table does exactly the same thing. The only difference is that it's the last 5 observations. So in this case, there's a lead for yes of 2.5% on the raw numbers. When you make the adjustment, it's even smaller than before. There's a 0.3% swing from no to yes, and the lead now increases from 2.5% to 3.1%. But yes still leads. It led before you made the adjustment, it led afterwards. Same way as no led before you made the adjustment and led afterwards in the first 5 surveys, opinion polls after the referendum. So basically, applying the New Caledonia treatment really has next to no effect. Has an effect, but negligible effect, and not an effect that would change the outcome if these polling numbers are a reflection of the population sentiment. Final slide. So there's a conclusion. There's, definitely in my opinion, a misinterpretation or a misunderstanding of what the current situation is. It's, leading to the mistaken belief that simply restricting the franchise will, be the silver bullet for yes. The circumstances have altered. Yes, sympathies have changed significantly among the different segments of the population, particularly amongst those from that are not born in Scotland or England. And as a consequence, it will have has a minimal impact on the overall yes support. In fact, certainly for those people that are born outside of Scotland and England, if you were to restrict the numbers voting from these countries, you might be shooting yourself in the foot if you're a yes supporter. So that's a summary of where we are. I've got some further observations, but that might be for the wider conversation we're about to have now, Peter.
Yeah, I didn't interrupt there, although there was a couple of points where I did think about things. I mean, one thing that came out to me was that although there's still predominantly no, people born in England, there is a big chunk of yes votes there. And the tendency would seem to be for that to be moving, albeit slowly and slightly, but moving towards yes. Is that fair?
That's my conclusion.
Yeah.
Yes, it's very gradual, very incremental, but wheels are turning slowly, but they are turning. And
what you've actually shown, and I think you've shown in 2 or maybe 3 different ways how this myth about excluding non-Scots from the referendum, from the voting, shall we say, would make this huge difference in favour of yes. It's a myth, and that has been demonstrated, I would say, conclusively by having been demonstrated in at least 2 and perhaps 3 different ways.
Well, that was what I was hoping to do, was just to try and look at it from different angles to explain that and explain it, and so the penny drops one way or another as to what the real situation is and what really happened in 2014 and what's really likely to happen in the future, given the circumstances we find ourselves in. People seem to just latch on to something that favours their view. I did myself initially when I saw the SRS report from 10 years ago. I thought, oh, okay. Not that I wanted to gerrymander the franchise, but I just thought, well, okay, that's something to hang our hat on. We've got a good solid base. That there's a certain cohort of people that are definitely in favour. But then when you look at it, you think we're just maybe just fooling ourselves, and that does not help us in the longer term when we're actually doing a campaign. And we can't afford to be complacent, and we need to face facts. There's work to be done, and there are no simple solutions or silver bullets.
Yeah, that's the importance. This relates to what I was saying earlier on, both about the fantasy of this petition for transfer powers which cannot be transferred, and the lies. Let's not be mealy-mouthed about it. The lies on which Brexit was based, the media lies and the media myths and the media fallacies that were promoted and promulgated by the media, and how that has consequences. And those consequences seem to have a tendency to be unfortunate. So when we take this to the Scotland's constitutional issue, we don't want the same sort of myths and fantasies and fallacies infesting the constitutional debate. And unfortunately, we've got a job trying to counter this, because the myths and the fantasies and the fallacies tend to be quite popular. Andrew Tickell, in his article, used the word intoxicating. He says the media, he refers to the media as peddling intoxicating stories about this, that, and the next thing. And that is the thing about they're intoxicating. They're titillating. They have appeal. And that's example that you've been looking at, the franchise example, the myth, the fallacy that excluding non-Scots would have a dramatic result, a dramatic effect, pushing the vote towards yes. That is an intoxicating idea, and that is why people latch onto it. What chance do you think we have of actually countering these? I mean, do you think this is having any? All right, we have a very small audience, but even on the audience that we have, do you suppose that this is having much effect? Do you think people are being dissuaded from believing these stories?
Well, I'd like to see the comments afterwards. Hopefully people, and also during the show, it'll be interesting to hear what people's views are, because they are the target audience. Because and if I, and we're hoping at least I'm hoping to get them to at least question these faiths, and it is maybe unpalatable as well to some extent, that you just want to exclude people for from voting. It doesn't feel right. But it doesn't have any impact anyway. So I don't know whether, I mean, we'll see what the comments are. I think at the moment, when I've posted comments elsewhere, it's not really got much buy-in. People seem to still stick with their preconceptions, their views, their comfortable views, the comfort blanket of fiction compared to the inconvenient reality of the truth of the situation, it's. But if I can change my mind, or at least if I can be open-minded enough to look at it, when I thought that 53% people in Scotland voted yes because an academic study said that that's what happened, if I can look at that, question it, and investigate it, and come to a different conclusion, and other people can at least look into it, and should at least be open to.
Yep.
or if they don't agree with what's being said, what is it about the analysis that you feel is wrong? What is it is wrong with the assumptions that I've been making? And then we can have a reasoned, rational, proper debate about it. And I could be wrong, but I'm not wrong just because somebody says so. I'll be wrong if somebody points out where it is that I'm gone off beam.
You're not wrong just because it's inconvenient to somebody. But you made the point earlier on about complacency, and this is my concern about these things. But in part, the fantasies and the fallacies and the myths are a distraction. They also cause division because different people believe in different fantasies and fallacies, and they're all competing. They're all stupid. They're all pointless. They're all meaningless. But they're competing. So we end up with this people arguing about things that actually have no relevance whatsoever, while the real issue is stranded there, and there's only 6 people in the whole country actually talking about it. They're a distraction and they're a diversion. They take both attention and resources away from the real issues. If people believe that the independence issue can be fixed simply by changing the franchise, or if they believe that it can be fixed with a petition asking to legislate for a democratic route, if they believe that the issue can be fixed with a Section 30 referendum, if they believe these things, then they're not going to be looking for the real solution. They're not going to be looking for what really matters, because they're complacent because they think they've found the answer. So there is a major issue behind this. I should say it goes back also to Brexit, because people were looking at Brexit, and they've been told lies that various issues, various social and political and economic problems were being caused by the EU. And they thought the solution was to get out of the EU. And it didn't matter how often they were told that this was not a solution, it would only make things worse. They believed, they were intoxicated by that idea.
Yeah, I think that's...
I got kind of carried away there. You know that happens, Stephen. Moving on, if there's various issues that arise from if I actually think that the franchise might be restricted, and one of them is on what criteria,
right? Okay.
And that comes down to the studies that you were looking at, the polling that the panel-based Norstat polling that you were looking at. It was simply they were divided into people born in Scotland, people born in England but living in Scotland, and people born outside the UK but living in Scotland. Mm-hmm. So it was all down to residency, but there could be other ways of defining this franchise. And so when people say, right, exclude non-Scots, right, you immediately have a problem. How do you define Scots?
It reminds me of one of the very first television programs I saw in black and white, around about 1970, of Professor Ian Grimble, a program called Who Are the Scots? Used to show that on a Sunday after church. So my mother forced me to watch it because it was a history program, and that was the first sort of inkling I got that people migrated. Scottish people aren't just here. We change over time. People come and go. People move from one country to another. And I don't think he ever answered the question. That was just his conclusion. And that was quite interesting. The thing with using the ethnics as a criterion is that there's an ethical question around the ethnics. You will recall everybody should really, that the Alistair Darling quote from 2014 that about Scottish nationalism being blood and soil nationalism, and that was just meant as a slur, and that was meant to shore up the no vote and to shake the yes vote or yes supporters, and to put that fear that we'd be living in a narrow-minded, bigoted country if we were independent. And that was when we had the widest possible franchise you could have. Everybody got a vote. If you were domiciled outside of Scotland, your main residence was in Scotland, and you had a second home here, and all you did was pay your council tax, 50% of the council tax, you got a vote. If you were British Army Armed Forces personnel doing a tour of duty up here and you came from elsewhere in the UK, you got a vote. If you were a student from Southampton, but you were at Edinburgh University, you got to vote, but you only stayed here during the term time. These people should, obviously, for a fair and democratic referendum, should not have a vote. That's nothing about ethnicity in that. That's just about, permanent residency. That's easy to define, and you don't have to argue about that. It's totally uncontroversial. It's just simply fair. It was unfair the last time that happened. So that's an easy one. You're not going to get accused of blood and soil nationalism for that. You're not going to be accused of gerrymandering for doing that. That's just a straightforward, fair rule that anybody. It'd be difficult for anybody to argue that wasn't fair.
That's absolutely correct, that it would be misrepresented. I mean, the term blood and soil nationalism, I mean, let's not beat about the bush here. What they're actually referring to there is fascism, Nazism. And that's that. It's that kind of blood and soil. That's what they're trying to imply.
Yep.
And that is about as far away from Scottish nationalism as you can possibly imagine. And I think we did get a bit intoxicated with the idea of being open. Anybody gets a vote. We were quite proud of that. But what the term blood and soil actually refers to is culture. And I came rather late to this idea that culture is actually an important part of Scottish nationalism. And I was, for all my days, I'd just been concerned with it as a constitutional issue, a political issue. But then I came to realise that the colonialism it's not just the country that is colonised; it is our minds are colonised, and all our institutions are colonised. Which takes me back to Sean Clarkin and his England out of Scotland, get England out of Scotland banner, for which he was arrested. And the court threw it out, but he was charged with some kind of hate crime for that. But it was what he was talking about there, and being deliberately provocative about it. But that's our Sean, what he was talking about there was getting English influence out of Scottish culture. That's the colonizer, and get the colonizers out of our cultural institutions as well as our political institutions, because the colonization isn't just political, it's cultural as well. So what the term blood and soil nationalism does is it takes that very simple, as you said, this straightforward and not at all controversial idea that Scottish cultural institutions and political institutions should be predominantly Scottish. Because of colonised, they're not. That's an uncontroversial idea. What the term blood and soil does is takes that uncontroversial idea and makes it controversial. because it associates it with some very nasty early to mid 20th century political movements. So again, it's basically it's a lie. It's taking something that is very natural, and I can't help but say it. The same applies to UDI. UDI is nothing. It's not this big deal that people make it out to be, but it's been burdened with all these connotations and associations ever since Rhodesia back in 1965. So that it's been made unthinkable. And they're trying to do the same with the Scottish independence movement, make it unthinkable with blood and soil. The same with UDI. It was made unthinkable because they didn't want us to think about it. It's as simple as that. It's propaganda, and it's colonizers' propaganda.
Yeah, I agree. I see the point about culture. I do agree with that. In Scotland, there is absolutely no question that our institutions, our educational institutions, and I think our health institutions as well, are not dominated by people born in Scotland. I've had a look at this. In the 19 universities in Scotland, I looked at this about a year ago, and I looked at them where the principals were born, the principals of these institutions, in terms of England, Scotland, or elsewhere. Just like the analysis we've been doing, the breakdown we've been doing on the opinion polls. So of the 19, I'm reading from a screen now, of the 19 there were, of the 19 principals, only 5 were born in Scotland. 8 were born in England, and 6 were born elsewhere. So more born elsewhere than in Scotland, and more. I mean, 14 out of the 19 were born outside of Scotland. So if you look at that compared to the population in Scotland, that's almost for English-born principals, there are 5 times as many. The disproportionality is 5. It's 5 times as many as you would expect to be there, to be in these positions, given the proportion in the population. 4 times as many.
Let's just, in any normal country, and we're talking about normality here, in any normal country, that would be considered unacceptable. Somehow Scotland is supposed to be an exception where this is considered acceptable. And I have to say, it springs to mind that some similar sort of figures would apply to Police Scotland. The senior police officers in Scotland, policing is dominated by people from Firth of Scotland. That is basically the message. I don't have the figures to hand to demonstrate that, but I believe that to be the case.
Yeah. Well, the head of Police Scotland is, of course, from north of England, isn't she? Northwest or northeast of England. So that just bears out your point straight away.
Doesn't even live in Scotland, as from what I believe. Right. Yes. I just want to stress this point. This is nothing to do with blood and soil nationalism. This is just to do with Scotland being a normal country or becoming a normal country. We can't do it without changing this the culture, decolonizing the culture.
Yeah, I mean I agree with you completely on that. It's not the same. You're right. Blood and soil and ethnics is not the same. I mean, by restricting, just going back to the voting franchise, by restricting that with the rules, the suggestions, the very simple suggestions that are made there, you're not taking into account. Ancestry is not coming into it. Grandparentage or parentage. DNA testing will not be required. You don't have to be 90% Pictish Gael to get a vote. All these things are impractical, as well as they would be used, like they'd be turned against
we
us.
won't be measuring the length of people's noses or the shapes of their ears or any of that nonsense. Yeah. Well, we can laugh about these things now, but it wasn't funny at the time. No,
The one thing that is
it's purely based on people who have been immersed in Scottish culture. To me, it just seems normal that people who are in charge of education should be in Scotland, should be people who have been immersed in Scotland's culture. And the same goes with policing. People come from. It's not saying that these people are inferior. Just because the Chief of Police Scotland comes from the north of England, that doesn't mean she's inferior at all. We're not wanting her because she's inferior or she's worse at the job. She just can't be doing the job in the same way as somebody who's been immersed in Scotland's culture.
Yeah.
That's all it is.
Yeah, that's fair enough.
We seem to have drifted just a little away from the matter of the franchise. And when we were talking previously on Thursday, when we have a production meeting, it came up about a documentary definition of nationality. We don't have that. That we have nothing, and no documentary evidence to say that we are Scottish. There is no Scottish passport, for example. So that option isn't open to us.
Yeah, it's difficult compared to other countries in Europe, and also other similar sized countries, whether it's Denmark or all Scandinavian countries. They all have their own sets of rules. They're the same size as us, but they're sets of rules that if you're in Denmark and you're from Scotland, but you're naturalised as a Dane, you've met all the criteria, you've been there long enough, and you've got yourself a Danish passport legitimately, you get to vote. If you're from Sweden or Norway and you're living in Denmark and you've been there most of your life, but you aren't naturalised, you don't get a vote. At least you don't get a vote on constitutional matters. You'll get a vote on local authority elections. You're not even sure if you get a vote in Danish elections. But it's all a bit stranger that we have. We are discussing this. We should discuss it, and we're looking for a fair, practical means of set of rules to hold a referendum. We should never lose sight of the fact what happened in the Brexit referendum, where there was a gerrymandering, where there was, I wouldn't say it was blood and soil, but it was, the Europeans, the EU residents were not allowed to vote in that. Not only that, British residents who lived overseas or who had gone overseas, I think it was 5 years, you were saying, Peter, had within 5 years they could still, or at least could apply to vote in the Brexit referendum. So they were getting almost a double whammy in favour of getting a leave vote. So these were really gerrymandering the rules. We're not talking about that at all. We should always bear in mind when we come to make this argument. If we come to make this argument, we should say, well, look, that's what they did. We're well within that. This is a fair approach. Look how they fixed it. They really fixed the franchise. We're not doing that. We're just excluding people who should be excluded, and we should include some people that weren't included. Let's say in the devolution referendum in 1997 or in 79, or even the Scottish independence referendum 2014, namely those people who have left, but maybe left only within a year or two of leaving. There's a referendum. Perhaps having lived there all their life, they should have maybe got.
I'm butting in here, Stephen, because believe it or not, we're running out of time. We're just about into final 5 minutes here. And I wanted to deal with the diaspora, and you've done that. So that perhaps there could be a way of including the diaspora. But the final thing that I want to address is the fact that it will be, or it certainly should be, a totally different kind of referendum. but your findings on the franchise, that wouldn't make it being a different kind of referendum, what I've called a proper constitutional referendum. What you've discovered would still apply, because it would be the same electorate in both cases.
Agreed. Yeah, it has we shouldn't have any bearing on it.
Right.
So none whatsoever. I can't see why.
So we still, the conclusion I think that we've reached in all of this is that a franchise based on residency, but proven residency, should be adequate. It should have been adequate in 2014. It simply needs to be tightened up, because in 2014, the residency qualifications were just far too lax. I mean, you could practically take a day trip north of the border and get a vote. It was that open, and it needs residency is fine. Ethnicity, it won't work, and it wouldn't do any good anyway, and it would do a lot of harm if you tried it.
Yeah, I think that's fair summation. I would just say that there's no reason why we couldn't look at what happened in New Caledonia recently, which is UN approved set of rules, and they were essentially based on three criteria: residency, as you were talking about, birthplace, and whether or not you were on the electoral register. And you didn't have to meet all of this. I said there were 6 or 8 specific criteria in each of these 3 referenda. You didn't have to meet all of them. You only had to meet one of them. So it wasn't like, a whole set of hurdles were preventing people from voting. It was just, you only had to meet one of these 6 or 8 thresholds.
Right.
So to get
this discussion will go on and on and on, I have no doubt. Quickly, Stephen, can you perhaps tell us a few words about what you'll be moving on to next, now that we've totally dealt with the franchise issue and put it to bed completely, if only?
Well, as a two-parter, maybe I want to look at the just going back again to opinion polls and what's, looking at this claim about where we are at the moment in terms of yes sentiment compared to where we were 10 years ago, 2014. The claims that, we're in a much better place now in terms of yes support than what we were immediately after the referendum. So I'd just like to run over that. And then maybe in a bit more detail, the second part would look at not just the 2 snapshots of, beginning of 2015 versus beginning of 2025, but what happened in between times, in terms of, people are saying, okay, yes has never been higher than it is now, or it's soaring, it's skyrocketing, the support, it's surging, and all these other sort of metaphors and euphemisms. And there are those that say it's flat, it's flat as a pancake, nothing's happened. So I'd like to look at both at that as well. So again, it's a bit more, there's some more sort of data, or certainly at least graphically shown to sort of look at actually what the reality of what I see as being the reality of the situation. So that's what I'd like to look at in the next two episodes, if we have time for that.
Yeah, that sounds very important for an understanding of our starting point, which is we're thinking in terms of a journey to independence. Starting point is obviously very important. I'll say thanks very much for joining us, Stephen, and I'll look forward to seeing you again next Sunday. Bye for now.
All right, bye, Peter.
And that's just about time for me to say goodbye as well. Just to remind you that I'll be with you on Wednesday afternoon at 2:00. And who knows what we'll be talking about then, but I will come up with something in the meantime. So that's Wednesday at 2:00. Today's show will, of course, be available to download or to watch as a recording. You will see plenty notes of that in the media. So in social media, I should say. So that's it for today, and all it remains is for me to, and we've had a comment come in just too late for us to deal with. It's bye from me.